Hello, I'm Laurie Lane Zucker, founder and CEO of Impact Entrepreneur, and we are at the Asia Pacific Impact Investing Summit in Sydney, Australia. And I'm with Sally Mccutchan of Impact Investing Australia, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Thanks for sitting down with me.
Thanks, Laurie, for having me.
Sally, tell me about your work.
So I'm actually the CEO of Impact Investing Australia, which is a market building organisation which is affiliated with the Global Steering Group on Impact Investing. So that Global Steering Group, I'm not sure if people are aware, is almost a multilateral made up of a number of countries, now about 30 countries across the world, which has national advisory boards which are tasked with growing the impact investment market. So we are a market building organisation in Australia for impact investment.
And how old is your organization?
It's around 5 years old now, so we've been doing this work for 5 years. A lot of our work is around government advocacy and trying to get policy change to support and enable impact investment in Australia, but we also run a couple of programs that are related to building the market as well.
I'd be interested to know what's the political climate around impact investing currently in Australia?
So there's been some smallish policy initiatives in Australia, about $50 million worth of policies, which range from supporting social enterprise development to understanding outcomes frameworks to supporting the development of social impact bonds. So relatively small. We've recently established in Australia a social impact investing task force, and I'm actually on that as well as part of my role with Impact Investing Australia. And the role of that task force is to actually examine the Commonwealth Government's role in impact investing in Australia and how it enables the system.
So, of the spectrum of types of investors in impact investing, you've got banks, you've got family offices, and high net worth individuals, you've got foundations. Where is it most active in Australia in terms of the types of investors?
So I think predominantly still at the family office and foundation level. We're seeing that there's a lot of direct investment from those organisations into social enterprises, and there's been a number of investments into social impact bonds. So we've probably had around 8 social impact bonds within Australia. There has been a little bit of interest at the larger scale end of town, and one of the largest institutions here has set aside around $70 million to impact invest. And then one of our major insurers, QBE, has also got a product called Premiums for Good, which actually allocates a percentage of its premiums to impact-related investments. So they're the 2 biggest probably initiatives in our market.
How about funding for early stage entrepreneurs? How would you describe or characterize the funding continuum for those folks now?
So there's a couple of places that they can go. There's a couple of grant programs, one of which we actually run as an organisation, which has been set up by the Department of Social Services here. That's a $7 million program across 3 years, and we issue $140,000 grants to social enterprises to pay for capacity building to help them to raise capital. So that's quite a good program, and it's helped a number of organisations to get to capital raising stage.
What stages? Where do they need to be in order to get that?
Typically, they need to be at around $100,000 of revenue to qualify, or a sort of a minimum viable sort of proposition in terms of their commercialisation. They can be. What's interesting about that program is many people just target for-profit or not-for-profit. That program targets both, so we're agnostic to the type of enterprise. So that's one program that's operating. The others they tend to be smaller, so you're talking at earlier stage, really startup, and they might be $10,000 to $20,000 to support the businesses. But that tends to be not government-funded programs, but more foundational-based programs.
How about angel networks that have an impact focus to them, or other types of impact specific funders? Are they emerging in the ecosystem here?
Yep. So what we've seen, we're a state-based country. So in the state of Victoria, which is where I come from, we've had some state government funding towards the establishment of a state-based angel network. So that's really the only one that exists formally in Australia at the moment, and that's really just started. So what we're hoping is that we'll get some further development of those angel networks. So we're tending to see not formalised works necessarily, but people that are interested in this space coming together at conferences like this to talk about, what their areas of impact focus are and how they might impact invest at that smaller end.
I'm guessing that as far as the banks are concerned, there might be some interest in social impact bonds and green bonds possibly. But how about other types of activity in the impact investing space? Are the banks at all involved?
The banks are looking at, as you say, I mean, green bonds has been very successful. And I should say, in talking about impact investment, I've focused on the social impact investment. We do have a much more developed impact market when you start to look at the environmental side. So a number of larger scale property funds that are very focused on environmental outcomes. But in terms of some of the things that the banks are looking at, one of the areas is sustainable agriculture. And they're looking at things like changing the risk and the interest rates based on sustainability metrics in the context of agriculture, so reducing the interest that might be payable by people in that space.
Now, it sounds like you're involved in impact investing globally, at least as far as where Australia sits in the ecosystem. If I'm an investor who has kind of a global perspective, what is the case that you make for Australia as a place for people to be directing their impact investing attention?
Gee, that's a bit of a tough one. At this point in time, I think we're struggling still to actually deploy the capital we have in Australia. As you know, we're the fourth largest superannuation fund market in the world. So we're still trying to work out how we actually tap into that huge pool of funds and deploy that capital as opposed to trying to bring capital into this market. I think most of the transactions that have been put up that certainly the ones that generate commercial returns have actually been actively demanded by Australian investors. So at this point, we're not sort of encouraging. I think the challenge for us more is how do we get more Australian capital into the region, and that's work that our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is looking at quite as a critical piece of its policy.
I've interviewed a number of Aboriginal entrepreneurs here today. I'm wondering, from your perspective, is kind of from a macro level, is there increasing attention in the impact investing space on those types of entrepreneurs and their concerns?
Definitely, and I think we have an Indigenous procurement policy as part of our government policy in Australia, which is actually mandating that a certain percentage of procurement is to Indigenous organisations, and that's been a relatively successful policy. It was established in 2015, and at that point I think around $5 million of procurement was going to Indigenous organisations, and that's now up close to $1 billion today. So it has been very much a government focus. For our smaller grant program, we're trying to get more Indigenous organisations to take grants. I think the real bottleneck is in that early startups phase for Indigenous organisations. There's not a lot of support at that level, and so the pipeline for more investment into Indigenous organisations is going to be stuck by the fact that there's that bottleneck at the startup point.
Give me the domain name of your website so people can get more information.
www.impactinvestingaustralia.com.
Well, thanks so much for sitting down with me.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks, Larry.